Okay, in the last video we set up our product constants, our product reduce or product list reducer, which handles the listing of products in our state, and then also the list products action. Now this needs to be fired off, and where we want to fire that off is going to be in HomeScreen. Now we don't want to do this. What we were doing before is bringing in Axios, and we were making the request directly from this component. We don't want to do that anymore. So we want to get rid of Axios, and in the use effect, I'm just going to clear this out. I'm going to keep the use effect, but just clear everything out in it. And then we don't need to set products as our local state anymore, or our component level state. So we can get rid of that. We don't even need use state. Now to dispatch our list products action, we actually have to bring that in from React Redux. So I'm going to go right, let's just go right here and let's import. So this is going to be from React Redux. And we want two things. We want to bring in useDispatch, so that'll be used to dispatch or call an action, and then useSelector, which is used to select parts of the state. We're going to want the product list part of the state. So first of all, to dispatch, we need to define a variable called dispatch and just set that to useDispatch. Okay, and we're using hooks here. In the past, we would use a high order method called connect, and we would have to map state to props, and it was just a pain. This makes it much easier to use. So now we have this useDispatch, and where we want to call the list products action, which we have to bring in actually. So let's say import list products, and that's going to be from our action file. So /action/product actions. And where we want to fire this off is in the use effect, because it does the same thing we were doing before. It makes the request to the back end to get products. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and dispatch the list products action. All right. Now, since we're using dispatch in this use effect, I'm going to pass it in here as a dependency, or we're just going to get a warning down in the console. And just this should actually call list products, and it should fill up our state. It's not going to be displayed down here just yet. In fact, we're going to get an error because products isn't defined. So just at the moment, just for the moment, I'm going to just say const products equals an empty array. All right, let me just see what we got here. Okay, so useSelector isn't used yet. That's fine. So let's go back here, and this is going to be empty, but I want you to look over here. So this diff is going to be the difference in state and what's changed basically. And up here you can see the actions that were fired off. We got product list request, and then we got product list success. So those are the actions that were fired off, because in our use effect we dispatch list products, which in our actions fire this off, and it happened to be successful, so it fired that off. It passed the data into the payload, and in our reducer that payload is getting put into products on a successful response. So if we look at products, you can see that it's filled. Excuse me. And if we look in our total state, you'll see that products are in here as well. Now to actually display those here, we have to select it from our state. So that's where useSelector comes in. So back in the home screen, let's go right under dispatch, and let's say const product list. So I just want to call this whatever I called it in my store. So product list right here, that's what I want to get. I want to get that piece of state. So we'll say product list equals useSelector, and what selector takes in is an arrow function. So it takes in state and then a function, and then what part of the state do we want? We want the product list part of it. Okay, now we can destructure here and pull out what we want from product list. And what we want is first of all, we want the loading, because we want to know if it's loading. We want the error, the possible error, and we want the products. Okay, so these are all parts of that state that could be sent down. So the loading, the products, and a possible error. So we're pulling that from our state. Now down here, this products variable should be used here, and it should loop through and whatever. We can get rid of this. But I also want to check to see if it's loading, and then that way we can implement a little spinner. Also, we want to check for an error. Okay, and if there's an error, we want to display that. So the way we can do it is, let's see, we'll go right under the H1. I'm going to open up some curly braces, and I'm going to say if loading, then we're actually going to have a little spinner or a little loader, but for now, before we create that component, we'll just put this in, let's do an H1 or an H2. And in here, we'll say loading. Okay, else, if there's an error, then we want to show that error. And again, we're going to have a message component, which is going to be an alert, but just for now, we'll use an H3. And what we would want to display in there is whatever that error message is, and that would come from the back end. And then finally, else, then we would want to display our row with our data. So I'm going to just cut that and put that inside this conditional here. So we'll go ahead and paste that in, save it. Let me just check this real quick. I misspelled error somewhere right here. All right, so let's go back, and now you can see we're actually getting our products. If I reload, you can see the loading flash real quick. That's because when it calls the request, it sets loading to true, and in our component, we're displaying that loading if it's true. Now, if we get an error, let's actually purposely create an error. So if I go to my back end, and we know that we're getting from product routes, we're hitting this route right here to fetch all products. Instead of res.json, right above it, I'm just going to say res.status, and we'll say 401 with it, which is a not authorized, and then I'll throw a new error, and we'll say not authorized. And now if I save and I go back to the front end, when we reload, we get not authorized. So whatever error we throw will display in this particular component. And we're going to do that in just about every screen, or every screen where we're fetching data. So I'm just going to get rid of that. I just wanted to show you that if we throw an error now from this route, it's going to show in that component. So now we get rid of that, go back, reload, and now our products that we're getting through Redux are now showing in our component because of that, this useSelector right here. We're able to get those pieces of state. So there's really two parts. There's firing off the action to actually get the product, send it through the reducer down into the state, and then there's the useSelector to actually grab it from the state and then pull out what we want from it and display it in our output. So I hope that makes sense. That's the best way that I can kind of explain it. If it's still confusing, don't worry about it, because we're going to do this same thing over and over in different screens and different components. All right, so in the next video, I want to actually create a loader or a spinner, so we don't have to do this H2 stuff, and then also a message component that will show a nice alert instead of showing an H3.